There is a moment, right before a man becomes dangerous to mediocrity, when he stops asking for permission. Not permission to act, permission to think. He stops checking his ideas against the faces in the room. He stops waiting for the nod, the smile, the small approving tilt of someone else's head, before he lets himself believe what he already knows. And the moment that happens, he takes his mind back. Everything around him starts to feel unfamiliar, colder, some would say, quieter, definitely, but also, for the first time in years, his. If you have ever felt like the people around you are slowly draining a resource you can't name, you already understand what this video is about. You are not going crazy. You are not becoming cold. You are waking up to a truth that Niccolo Machiavelli understood 500 years ago. Sitting in exile, stripped of his title, watching the very republic he'd served collapse into the hands of men who mistook loyalty for love and love for weakness. Watching the very republic he'd served collapse into the hands of men who mistook loyalty for love and love for weakness. He didn't write The Prince as a manual for cruelty. He wrote it as an autopsy of power, a cold, unsentimental look at why good men lose, and why the ones who survive are the ones who master something almost nobody talks about: detachment. Not the kind that ends in isolation, the kind that ends in freedom. Let's start with the thing nobody tells you about attachment. It isn't just emotional. It's tactical. Every time you attach your sense of self-worth to another person's opinion, you hand them a lever. You may not feel it happening. It's subtle, almost tender in its disguise. A need to be understood, a need to be liked, a need for your mother, your boss, your ex, your old friend group to see you as good, as smart, as worthy. And because that need feels like love, you never question it. You just keep feeding the machine. Machiavelli watched this pattern destroy empires. He observed that rulers who needed to be loved by everyone became predictable, and predictable men are easy to manipulate. He argued, and this is one of his few ideas people actually remember correctly, that it is safer to be feared than loved. If you cannot be both, because love is a bond of obligation that people break the instant it benefits them, while fear is a bond of consequence that holds even when convenient. Now, before you take that the wrong way, this isn't a lesson in becoming feared. Most of us aren't running principalities, but translate that insight into your daily psychology, and it becomes something quietly devastating. The people who need your approval will keep it. The people who need nothing from you will respect you. And the people you are constantly trying to please, they were never going to carry you anywhere. They were just going to keep you where you already are. That's the first curiosity you need to sit with. Are you being loved, or are you being managed by your own need to be loved? Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the long, often lonely work of separating your authentic self from the roles you were handed by your family, your culture, your childhood wounds. He believed that most people never complete this process. They live and die wearing what he called the persona, the social mask assembled to be accepted, and they mistake that mask for their identity. Here's the part that should unsettle you a little. Jung said the mask isn't the enemy. Masks are useful, even necessary, for functioning in a society. The danger is forgetting you're wearing one. The danger is when the applause for the mask starts to feel like applause for you, and slowly, without noticing, you begin making decisions not from your center, but from the edges, from whatever will keep the audience clapping. Picture a man who spent 15 years building a career his father approved of, not one he chose, one that was chosen for him, quietly, through decades of dinner-table comments and disappointed silences. He is successful by every visible metric, and he is hollow, because the entire structure of his life was engineered around somebody else's validation, not his own compass. This is what detachment actually targets. Not people, dependency. Now, here is where most self-help content gets it dangerously wrong, and where I want to be precise, because precision is the entire difference between wisdom and damage. Detachment does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean cutting off empathy, abandoning the people who love you, or treating relationships as transactions to be optimized. That's not mastery. That's just a different kind of wound, wearing a philosopher's coat. The Stoics were clear about this, and they're constantly misquoted by people who want an intellectual excuse for apathy. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the sharpest minds in Roman philosophy, built his entire system around a single distinction. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. Your body, your reputation, other people's opinions of you, not in your control. Your judgments, your desires, your responses entirely in your control. Detachment, in the Stoic sense, is not detachment from people. It's detachment from outcomes you were never meant to control in the first place. You can love someone fully and still refuse to let their mood dictate your morning. You can care about your reputation and still refuse to let a stranger's opinion online reroute your entire nervous system for 6 hours. That is not coldness. That is architecture. You are building walls around the right rooms. Machiavelli understood something similar. Though he framed it through politics rather than emotion, he warned rulers against depending too heavily on mercenaries and auxiliary forces. Soldiers borrowed from other states, fighting for pay rather than conviction. Why? Because borrowed strength collapses exactly when you need it most. The moment your foundation depends on forces outside your control, you are no longer the author of your own outcome. You are a passenger in your own kingdom. Translate that into psychology, and you get something like this. Your confidence cannot be a mercenary force. If it only shows up when other people are validating you, it will abandon you in the one moment you actually need it, when you're alone, making the hard decision with no audience and no applause. Real self-possession has to be a standing army, trained in private, loyal, regardless of witnesses. This is why so many talented people stay small. Not because they lack ability, but because their entire operating system runs on borrowed confidence, rented from people who can revoke it at any moment. Let's go somewhere uncomfortable for a second, because that's where the truth usually lives. Think about the last time you changed your opinion not because new evidence convinced you, but because you sensed disapproval forming in the room. Think about the last time you softened an idea, delayed a decision, or shrank an ambition because you could feel someone's judgment pressing against you before they'd even said a word. That pressure has a name in psychology: social threat response. Your brain, evolved across hundreds of thousands of years in small tribal groups, treats social rejection with almost the same neural machinery it uses for physical pain. Being excluded from the group once meant death. So your nervous system still reacts to a raised eyebrow, a cold text reply, a friend's silence, as though your survival is at stake. It isn't, not anymore. But the wiring doesn't know that yet. This is the invisible war most ambitious people are fighting without realizing it. Not a war against laziness. Not a war against lack of talent. A war against an ancient alarm system that screams every time you consider standing apart from the group's opinion, even when the group is wrong, even when the group is small-minded, even when the group has never built anything remotely close to what you're capable of building. Detachment is how you turn the volume down on that alarm, not by silencing empathy, by silencing the part of you that mistakes disapproval for danger. There's an old story, retold so many times its origin is uncertain, but its structure is worth telling anyway, because it captures something Machiavelli, Jung, and the Stoics all agreed on from different angles. A young sculptor was working in the town square, and every passerby stopped to offer an opinion. One said the nose was too long. Another said the shoulders were uneven. A child said the whole thing looked nothing like a man at all. The sculptor adjusted the nose for the first critic, reshaped the shoulders for the second, softened the whole figure for the child. By the end of the week, the statue pleased everyone a little and represented no one completely. It had become, in trying to satisfy every eye that passed, a monument to nobody's vision, least of all his own. That is what happens to a life built on constant feedback from people who have no real stake in your outcome. You end up sculpted by committee, technically presentable, fundamentally unrecognizable, even to yourself. Now, I want to be careful here, because there is a dangerous version of this idea circulating in a lot of dark psychology content, and it deserves to be named directly, instead of quietly implied. Detachment is not a license for narcissism. It is not permission to discard people the moment they stop being useful. And if that's the philosophy you walked in here looking for, you're going to leave disappointed, because that isn't strength. That's fragility, wearing a mask of strategy. A person who treats every relationship as disposable the moment it stops serving them isn't detached. They're terrified of ever being in a position where they need someone, and that need gets exploited. So, they preemptively burn the bridge before anyone else can. Real detachment, the kind that built empires and produced philosophers, whose ideas outlived their bodies by centuries, is quieter than that. It's the capacity to stay engaged with people you love, while refusing to be governed by people who don't actually know you. It's the discipline to separate feedback that comes from someone who has earned the right to speak into your life from noise that comes from someone who simply has an opinion and a platform to voice it. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing a few centuries after Machiavelli, but wrestling with a similar problem, described most people as living according to what he called herd morality, values absorbed passively from the surrounding culture, rather than examined and chosen. He believed the rare individual who managed to step outside that herd, who built values through their own suffering, discipline, and reflection rather than inheriting them wholesale, was engaging in one of the few truly creative acts available to a human being. Detachment, understood this way, is simply the decision to wake up on a slightly different schedule than everyone around you. It's uncomfortable because waking up alone in a room full of sleeping people means you're the only one who can see how dark it actually is. But it also means you're the only one who can see the door. The first shift is learning to separate people from their opinions. This sounds obvious until you try to actually do it. Someone criticizes your plan, and your instinct is to defend the plan, defend yourself, or abandon the plan entirely. The disciplined move is different, you ask. Quietly, does this person have relevant expertise, genuine investment in my well-being, and no competing agenda? If yes, the feedback deserves real consideration. If no, it deserves acknowledgement and nothing more. Not agreement, not defense, just acknowledgement. The way you'd nod at weather you can't control. The second shift is protecting your attention the way Machiavelli protected borders. He understood that a state constantly reacting to every provocation from every neighboring territory would exhaust itself before ever building anything of lasting value. Your attention works the same way. Every argument you engage in online, every group chat drama you insert yourself into, every comment section you can't resist correcting, these are border skirmishes. They feel urgent. They are rarely important. The people building real empires, real careers, real internal mastery are not the ones winning the most arguments. They're the ones who decided which battles were beneath the cost of fighting. The third shift is the hardest, and it's this. You have to become willing to disappoint people in the short term, to respect yourself in the long term. This is not cruelty. This is the price of an actual spine. Every time you choose the comfortable agreement over the honest boundary, you are making a small deposit into a account of resentment that eventually comes due. When you stop performing for approval, the relationships built entirely on that performance do tend to fall away. That part is true, and it can hurt. But the relationships that survive, the ones with people who wanted you, not your compliance, those relationships get stronger. Because for the first time, the other person is relating to something real instead of a carefully managed reflection of their own expectations. Machiavelli spent the final years of his life largely alone, stripped of political power, writing to a friend that he would return home each evening, remove the muddy clothes of the day, and dress properly before entering his study. That's not the image of a cold, calculating cynic. That's the image of a man who found a form of independence so complete that even exile couldn't touch the part of him that mattered. He had been abandoned by the political world he served his entire life for, and in that abandonment, he discovered a self that had never actually depended on that world in the first place. That is the entire argument of this video. distilled into one image. The applause was never the source of your strength. It was only ever a reflection of it, and reflections disappear the moment you stop needing the mirror. If this reached something in you, there's a companion piece to everything you just heard. The other half of this discipline, the part Machiavelli and the Stoics both insisted you master before you master anything else: how to read people without becoming one of them. That video is waiting for you next, and it goes further than this one dared to go.